Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. We do so by painting an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those individuals are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality and the reintegration process. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now please, welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 99 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Pathways. Pathways and the pathways we choose. That has been a theme of this podcast. It is indeed a tenet, in my opinion, of desistance champions. That is, the pathways we choose shape our life course experiences. And of course, we love highlighting these via the lived experiences of our guests. This week, I am delighted to have Holly Busby of the National Institute of Corrections on our program, who is indeed going to share with us some of her early career pathways, which led her to her current position as Chief of the Community Service Division for the National Institute of Corrections, or NIC, out in Washington, D.C. Holly and I are going to discuss current and future trends with evidence-based practices, in addition to some fascinating projects that NIC is working on. If you have never heard of or taken advantage of their resources, I encourage you to listen intently and please reach out to them, as they are indeed an option for those of you looking to up your evidence-based practice game. Please enjoy my conversation with Holly Busby, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Holly. Why don't we start off, as I do with all of my guests, just kind of tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey, both educationally and vocationally.
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to thank you, Joe, for having me join you today. I'm a fan of your podcast, and I'm really pleased with the attention that you're bringing and all of the topics and things like that. So it's a real honor for me to be here today with you.
Oh, well, thank you.
You bet. So, I can tell you a little bit about my background. My educational background is in social work. And it took me a little while to get there. I was very grateful for a college advisor who, when I went in their office and I couldn't quite figure out what I was supposed to do, but I talked to them about the things that I wanted to do in life. And they said, "Oh, we think you want to be a social worker." So luckily, I followed that recommendation, and I have found it to be one of the most adaptive kinds of degree, just because it's allowed me to work in a variety of professions. So I started out my career 30 some years ago in child protection, working with children and families. And then from there, I went on to become a victim services social worker, in which I worked with victims of general crime, as well as victims of sexual assault. And that then led me to going back to school and getting my post license so that I could become a deputy sheriff. And I worked as a patrol deputy for several years. And then from there, I found my way to probation and parole, which ultimately then brought me to the National Institute of Corrections.
I love the varied pathway you take there, as far as you've got experience with social work, child protection, and law enforcement. So you've got a nice, rich lens through which to view the human condition, if we will, which, as you said, has now led you to the National Institute of Corrections, where you are now chief of the Community Services Division for the NIC, or again, National Institute of Corrections. Tell us about your role there and what you're currently doing now for NIC out in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Okay. So, NIC is housed within the Department of Justice, and we're administratively placed within the Bureau of Prisons. We maybe give your listeners just a little bit of a background about the history of NIC and how we came to be. Not everyone is familiar with NIC, and I think we have a really cool story about how we came about. So in September of 1971, there was this huge riot in New York's Attica prison, and it really brought national attention to corrections and the practices of imprisonment in the United States. And so in response to those riots and to what was really, resulted in the deaths of both people who were incarcerated as well as the people who were charged with their care in this tragedy, the federal government decided to create the National Institute of Corrections. We were finally put together in 1974 and received our first funding in 1977 to really come together to develop a body of corrections knowledge, to coordinate research and formulate policy recommendations. We were created to provide professional training to corrections employees across the country, as well as executives. And NIC is really proud of the fact that we provide a forum for the exchange and advancement of ideas in corrections. And so we've been providing training, technical assistance, and information services for 48 years. In a couple years, it'll be 50. We'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary. And so our mission is to advance public safety by shaping and enhancing correctional policies and practices through leadership, learning, and innovation. And for those of you that don't know, the majority of employees of NIC are practitioners from the field. We've walked in the shoes of probation and parole officers, of law enforcement officers, of correctional professionals. And so NIC is a place where we can really align our personal values and our purpose with that mission and vision of our agency.
Yeah, and I know from personal experience what a great resource hub NIC is. And I did not know that bit of trivia, although it was hardly a trivial event, linking the birth of NIC with the Attica prison riots. I just watched an amazing documentary. I will find out where that was and tag it on to this episode at the end about the tragedy at Attica. So yeah, thank you for that information. You and I crossed paths a long time ago before you left Minnesota in evidence-based practice circles. What are some of the bigger trends that you've seen over the years in the arena of evidence-based practices in corrections?
Yeah, wow. Well, I mean, we've seen a lot in the time that we've been working as professionals in this field. I think for the longest time, agencies have worked to, we've been really lucky, right? There's been experts out there who have created incredibly effective research-based interventions, COG and core correctional practices and things like that. And so there's a great amount of confidence and competence in those programs. I think some of the biggest trends that we're seeing right now is the realization that how we implement those practices, those tried and true practices that we know are effective, how we implement those matters. And so, back, and I know you'll be able to relate to this, right? And so will so many of your listeners. the way we used to do things is a leader would maybe go to a conference or go to some sort of a meeting, and all of a sudden they'd hear about something new, like thinking for a change or something like that. And they'd get excited and they'd be like, oh, that's what we need, and they'd go back and then they'd say, okay, pick somebody to go, send them to a training and get trained. And, then we're going to see our outcomes improve, right? And what would happen is the staff would go with very little support. The staff would be trained and then have to come back, and on top of all their additional duties, they have to now provide this additional training or service, and we weren't paying very much attention to, was it working or wasn't it? And all of a sudden, we'd look at our outcomes and we'd think nothing is changing. And so then we'd go off and chase the next shiny object, right? And so now I'm really excited about seeing the trend that leaders and organizations have become really aware of the importance of not only what we're doing, but how we're implementing and supporting that innovation, so that it can really be used with fidelity and get the kind of outcomes that we want. And so NIC has really been working and putting our efforts towards supporting organizations, learning around implementation science, and the importance of how an organization needs to change in order to allow these interventions to work. So we're really excited about that. Those are some of the biggest trends that we're seeing right now, and that we're really trying to help support.
Could not agree more with you as to the importance of implementation science. As you alluded to, nobody's really reinventing the wheel with risk, need, responsivity, but it's the application thereof, that implementation, that we need to focus on. Which I want to ask you this question from your chair there with the National Institute of Corrections. How do we strike that balance between fidelity and making sure that we still sort of recognize the individual? In other words, so that we're not simply training these robots, for example, to read, for example, thinking for a change curricula without reading the room, or again, how kind of get out of that box checky mentality of how we attempt to enrich the populations that we're serving. We talked offline about this. My listeners know I just got back from an amazing trip to Scotland where I had the honor of meeting Shad Maruna and Fergus McNeil. And one of the students who I brought over there asked the question, and the response from Fergus was, well, training is what you do with factory workers who you want to have them perform the same task with efficiency over and over again. What we should be doing is educating versus training. But again, I know with fidelity, we don't want it just to be the wild, wild west out there and all of our trainers and practitioners freelancing. So again, Holly, where do you see that sort of balance between fidelity, but recognizing, again, sort of the individuality of the client and the responsivity of that client, really?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And I don't know if I'll have the best answer, but I it really does go to that heart of what, I know is near and dear to your heart around assistance, and that the fact that it needs to be a very individualized approach, right? Focusing on developing positive relationships, and that, you're building upon strengths. And so I really love that you're actually even challenging me with the language that I'm using, because you're right. I agree 100% with you. We need to move away from that, even the language around training, to really, it's more about development of the people that are doing the work on behalf of our agencies, right? As well as developing the people that are on supervision. And so I love the fact that, you kind of challenged me on that, because I agree with you. I mean, there does have to be, there's going to always be a certain, need for skill-based training, right? We all start somewhere in our professional growth. But you're right, we don't want to create, just robots. And we also, I think the other thing that's really important about that is that it expands the responsibility more broadly in the organization, rather than placing so much of the responsibility, although they have an important role in that, on the direct supervision agent, but more broadly about, okay, so what is it about this environment that may be impacting the ability of this program to be successful or to be delivered with fidelity. But I agree with you. I think we have to develop our people in a way that allows them, a place for them to be themselves while putting in to practice, right, evidence-based programming and interventions.
You have a great front seat sort of where the trends are heading, not so much with evidence-based practices, but in your current role, where do you envision the field of probation heading? You mentioned just now desistance, for example. Do you see any big sea changes on the horizon?
I really am excited about the future. And I think, one of the things is that there's an awakening going on. I don't know that we've ever seen this much attention, good or bad, to the work that we do in our profession. And it's really going to require us to step up and to change the way that we're doing our work. And I think that that's wonderful. I invite the challenges, and I am excited to be a part of that. I think it's, just as a base to look at why we need to change. Maybe you're familiar, and if not, I would really encourage your readers, if you're not familiar with the recent publication by Petrick, Pratt, Johnson, and Cullen, that they did a recent meta-analysis on custodial sanctions and reoffending, and they have found, again, this is, there was a previous research project that showed the same, but the outcome is that custodial sanctions have no effect on reoffending, and they actually slightly increase it when compared with the effect of non-custodial sanctions, such as probation. So that's good for us. And those of us that are, have been doing this work, right, believe in community supervision. We believe that people can change. We believe that people are best served when they stay within their own communities. So that's good. However, there's also that thought process that probation has gotten too big too. The recent BJS 2020 probation survey estimates that there's still 3.8, almost 3.9 million adults under community supervision at the year end 2020. It's too big. It's too much. It's too difficult for us to do the level of work with the people who need us the most when the system is as large as it is. And so I really think that there is going to be a continued downsizing of supervision in America, period. I think we're going to get better at being able to focus and identify the people who really do need some period of incarceration to protect others, whereas the majority of our work is going to be done within our communities, within keeping people in a place where they can stay close to family, all those things that are important that we know actually is proven to work. And so I'm excited. I think that we are headed in the right direction. And we just need to really capitalize on the energy, the bipartisan support that we hear for calls and change, and really take advantage of this moment in our history to make a difference.
Could not agree more. Can you share with us a little bit as to the project NIC is working on providing technical assistance for pretrial services, and perhaps differentiate between that and traditional probation and parole for our listeners who are unaware of that distinction between pretrial and standard supervision?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the ways that we think we're really going to be able to make a difference in kind of where the field needs to go is to really at the national level have a very clear understanding of what pretrial services, or what pretrial justice is and what it is not. And there has been, a growing interest at the national level to really take a look at that piece of the system. And at NIC, my division, we support pretrial, probation, and parole. And we know that it's really important to have an equal look at each of those areas simultaneously. There's been times in our history where we'll over-focus on just one area. So for a while, it was all on reentry, right? And the focus was there and the investment was there. And then, we'll look at something different. And we really believe at NIC, the approach needs to be that each part of the system is an opportunity to reduce harm, to provide good intervention, to divert people out of the system that don't need to be there. And then certainly the function of pretrial really is, it's the historical purpose underlying it is the bail process, right? And so pretrial really is about maximizing release while at the same time maximizing public safety and court appearance. That's different than probation, which is really a court-imposed criminal sentence that happens to somebody after they're adjudicated. And so we've had this, we have a lot of agencies across the country where pretrial services is just being housed within probation. And ideally, that would be a separate entity, a separate agency, because they have a separate purpose and a separate mission. And so I think we've been working with several jurisdictions around the country who are really taking a leading role in identifying best practices. NIC is really proud of the work that we have done in the area of pretrial justice, and it would encourage your listeners to check out our website. There are a lot of great publications. We had a pivotal publication entitled A Framework for Pretrial Justice, the Essential Elements of a High-Performing Pretrial Services Agency, as well as publications that talk about, money as a stakeholder in the criminal justice system. And we have a great broadcast on there that talks about maximizing release, maximizing public safety, and maximizing appearance. So everything that you want to know and should know, even if you're in probation and parole, about pretrial can be found on NIC's website. And I know that you'll be sharing some of those resources with your listeners. And I really invite them to come back and take a look at the pretrial publications that we have. And I think it matters so much because, again, as we've seen our system grow and grow and grow, whether that's at the probation level, whether that's at the institution level, it all starts at the front end of the system. And if we can do a better job, or an equally as good a job at every point of the system, that's when we're going to actually see true reform and true change in how America's criminal justice system operates.
I will leave NIC's website link in the description of this program, so folks will have it right there when they read the description of this episode. We are beginning to put more of an emphasis on our staff health and wellness, not just about client resiliency, but also staff resiliency. Holly, can you speak to that shift between NIC's focus on leadership needs to staff needs?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first came to the division a little over 5 years ago, we really sat down together collectively as a team and looked at our offerings. And we found that we were pretty leadership heavy, right? We were investing quite a bit of our financial resources into leadership development, which is extremely important. And our commitment remains as strong as it ever has been to continue to support executive level leaders. But we really know, right, that it's important for all levels of the organization to be supported, whether it's frontline staff, frontline supervisors, managers, all the way up to executives. And so NIC is much more intentional in making sure that we are providing support to workers at all levels of the probation, pretrial, parole field. And because it's so important, if we want to create employees and leaders, right, that really are reflective of the profession that we need, right, in order to make the change, we have to invest in them. And I think that, right, you invest in the people who are helping the people. And that's kind of been a new focus for us on our team as we are kind of looking at our project planning for the next 3 to 5 years.
Talk about, as to leadership training, the shift that NIC is making to more of a purpose-driven and coaching model of leadership. Emphasis on the word coaching.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this project. And I have to say, I mean, we have a lot of projects going on right now at NIC. And if I could, I would talk about every one of them. My division has about 26 plus projects that we're doing, all the way from staff health and wellness to parole decision making, dosage probation, all those kinds of things. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to talk about all of those things today. However, I did want to be able to talk about the change that we're taking our leadership development course. So we're really creating something that gets away from operational training, which historically was something that we've done, to really looking at leading with purpose. And some of the new modules that we're developing and looking at is trying to help leaders kind of take their own individual stock on their purpose, helping them learn how to create an environment where staff can do their best work, helping them learn how to really create a true learning organization, to improve their communication, to keep it in line with the purpose of the agency, and also really having us a focus on effective implementation strategies. So we're super excited about rolling this out. It's going to be more of a learning lab. It'll take place over about a 9-month period. We're looking forward to piloting it. We're going to be piloting it with several jurisdictions which are working to implement, some new practices in their organizations that will create organizations that look more like coaching organizations versus more of those containment models that we know, or those law enforcement models that kind of still remain out there. So we're excited. If you're interested in learning more about the training, certainly sign up for notice on NIC's website. Certainly be able to, we're anticipating opening this up to the public after it's piloted this year. So sometime in 2023, if you're interested in checking out this leadership program, we'd invite you to apply. We're really excited because NIC really believes that helping leaders and agencies connect purpose to practice is really going to lead to better outcomes for not only the individuals, but the organization as a whole.
So speaking of the many projects you have going on, I want to make sure I'm clear, because in my research and prep for this interview, I wanted to ask you about your project regarding facilitating behavior change. Is that a different project? And if it is that something that some of us might recognize as a practice model, Holly?
Yeah, so you will recognize it. It's one of many. And it's in what's really cool about what we're doing right now is that we're building and projects and creating funding for projects that are really interrelated. They build upon each other, right? Because you can't do everything in one project, but certainly supporting purpose-driven leadership and purpose-driven organizations, and then providing this facilitating behavior change opportunity for line staff are ways in which they're all interconnected. And so really what this project is looking at is it's in line with the studies that show that, right, core correctional practices, when agents can interact with individuals effectively, it produces better outcomes. And so it's very similar to EPICS, STAR, and STICS. But the reason NIC exists is to provide our services and high quality training to agencies who can't afford it. And it's actually surprising the number of agencies still across the country that have not implemented evidence-based practices or core correctional practices. Some of it's because maybe they aren't as familiar with it, but a lot of it has to do with limitations in their budget and resources. And so NIC, would encourage agencies who have not implemented or who are not currently using some of those the EPICS, the STAR, the STICS, because it's very similar to that. But our commitment with this project is to ensure that all agencies across the country can implement this at no cost. And the other thing that we're excited about with this is that when we develop the curriculum, it's not just a professional development curriculum or skills-based development. It is also looking at how to successfully implement it. So we take the tenets of good implementation science and incorporate it in how we're going to assess the applications. Is there work we need to do to help the agency ready the soil for implementation? And so we're really excited about this. And again, our whole existence is to ensure that pretrial probation and parole agencies across the country have access to national experts and the highest quality training programs that there are. And so that's what the goal of this particular project is.
Again, I really just appreciate the work that you do. And for those agencies or practitioners out there who may not be aware of NIC, as you're just hearing, a great resource. Please take advantage of their expertise and leverage their expertise. So between this podcast and my YouTube channel, also entitled The Criminologist, I am clearly a believer in multimedia approach to educating practitioners. Now, I understand NIC is working on creating some on-demand videos for probation staff. Is that true?
Yes, and I'm really excited about this project too. I'm excited about all of the projects that we're doing, as you can tell. But this one's really cool because it's we're getting in touch with the way that our learners like to learn. And let's be honest, we have, 5 generations, they say now, in the workforce. And so NIC has really had to get out of our comfort zone. The pandemic helped us with that, right? Helped all of us all of a sudden embrace online learning more and virtual learning. And so I really see this as an exciting time for us. I think we've pulled the field along by many years. I mean, corrections professionals, let's be honest, really liked in-class learning, right? Don't make me go online. I don't want to take an e-course. We have a new generation in the workforce. And I think maybe surprising for some of us, right? They get their information online. They like it on demand. They like it quick. They like it very readily accessible. They like it interactive. And so we listen to our constituents. And that's what we heard. We've heard them say, if I could just look at something as a quick reminder, right, to support my learning. And And so we put together a project in which we are going to create micro on-demand videos, much like, like kind of how do I change my tire, or, my sink is clogged, but really related to core correctional practices. And we, over the course of the next couple of years, are going to create our goal is at least 20 small micro videos. And our first series is really going to be looking at things like engagement strategies. It's going to be looking at the life cycle of kind of when you first meet a person on supervision, through all the twists and turns of that, to then successfully discharging them. And I think what's really important to know about this is that although we're developing it as a way to supplement agencies' training programs, our target audience is the individual supervision agent. We want line staff to know that there is a resource out there, and that we recognize that you can't possibly learn everything in a training program or retain all of it, right? We know that a good adult learning theory says that it's more of what happens when you're on the job, the support you get there, that really leads to, a change and kind of retaining a skill. And so we're just about ready to produce our first 5 videos in early April. We're working really hard. They're going to be on, like I said, engagement strategies, and some sub kind of things are how to create a connection, establish expectations, defining roles. Next step in the process would be learning about that person. So introducing, an introduction to assessment or information gathering, those kinds of things. And it's not going to be your traditional role play video, right? I mean, probation staff, we've done it all our lives. We see it all the time. But yet, we're trying to figure out, is there a different way to do this? And what we're trying to be really careful with in this project, because too often probation staff can look at the response of the person on supervision and come up with reasons of why that won't work for them, right? And so in this project, we're really mindful of that. And so we want the focus to not be on the person that's on supervision, but the focus is really, and what we want the person to pay attention to is the skills of the actual probation officer. So it's going to be great. We're going to get them released as soon as possible. We have them available on our website. And in addition to the little micro videos, for those people who like to take a deeper dive into the research behind it or learn more about that particular thing, we're going to have other resources available so that it's really supportive. It can be accessed. Like I said, we're going to make all of the material downloadable. We'll encourage agencies to incorporate them in their academies and their, yearly refresher courses. But again, we really hope that probation officers across the country, use this resource. It's that quick little reminder and encouragement, and for you to know that, there are people that are there to support you. And it's funny, we have a steering committee filled with, one of my rules on this one was I want line staff. I want young people. I want the people that are right, because so a lot of us, let's be honest, we're a little bit older. And although I do watch YouTube, I'm not a TikToker or anything like that. And so we've got a great group of probation staff from across the country that are, their agencies are giving of their time to provide feedback and input into this project. So we're really hoping that it's going to be well received by the people we want it to be.
Well, I, for one, am super excited about the drop of those videos, and I'll keep my listeners posted on when those drop. It's so funny when you mentioned YouTube and you gave the example, Holly, of going on YouTube to fix your clogged sink or change a tire. I was reflecting the other day on, okay, what's another angle I can take with folks who I'm trying to get to understand social learning theory, which, as you know, is at the center of general personality and cognitive social learning theory, Bond and Andrews. And I thought to myself, gang, it's when, for example, you can't figure out how to change the the spool on your weed whacker, what do? You go on YouTube. I mean, that's social learning theory, folks. You go on YouTube, you observe, you learn through observation, you practice. So I guess that's an example of great minds thinking alike with the YouTube analogy there. Hey, what is on the horizon for Holly Busby? Holly, when you're back on the show in 3 years, what are you and I going to be sitting down to talk about?
Wow, that's a great question. My boss told me she was interested in seeing. That was the one question that I didn't tell her how I was going to answer. So I think it's like I said, I'm really excited. This is a great time to be working in criminal justice. There are so many opportunities for those of us who, for so many years, knew there needed to be change, desired change, maybe weren't so much of, the enforcement piece. I mean, there's a part of me, like in my career, it's about the human condition, whether you're working with victims, whether you're working with children and families, whether you're working with people who have committed crimes, whether you're working with probation staff, right? It's all about the human condition and how we treat each other. And so I really think that my hope is if you have me back in 3 to 5 years, we're talking about how the field has changed, how we have brought more humanity into our work, how we have moved away from the use of stigmatizing language, how we've really recognized the importance of helping the people who help the people. I just am, like I said, I'm really hopeful that there are a lot of opportunities right now. What I'm really focusing on, and I think it goes to kind of how you started this about how did you get to NIC? My hope is that when I'm talking to you in 3 to 5 years, one of the things I'm bragging about is how I helped influence and build the next generation of NIC talent. It's really important to me that I use time right now to reach out to some of the best and brightest that are out there. Our field are full of them. And I'm going to have the opportunity to hire in the next coming years. So I definitely would say if you're interested and you're interested in a career in which you can really tap into your creativity, your innovation, and try to help create a new way of doing criminal justice in America, consider applying for a job with NIC. And one of the ways that you can look for those opportunities is to sign up on USA Jobs, which is where all federal jobs are located. I'd encourage people, if you're not familiar with the federal system, become educated in it. It is an interesting career. I enjoy working with people from all over the country. It's a great spot to spend time and bring your passion and your talents to.
Well said, Holly. And speaking of passion, I appreciate your passion and your vision, and you're an inspiring individual. Holly Busby from the National Institute of Corrections, thank you so much for joining the Criminologist podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Joe. It was a lot of fun.
Bye-bye, Holly. A big criminologist thank you once again to Holly Busby of the National Institute of Corrections. As promised, I'm going to pack as many resources into the episode description of this podcast, which Holly was gracious enough to provide, including the National Institute of Corrections webpage. She also provided a link that you can click on should you like to be notified to register for any NIC opportunities. She also included, and I will provide, a pretrial webpage. There's also a link entitled How Can NIC Help? Again, if you've never had the opportunity to take advantage of their resources, click on that link and check out what they can do for you and your agency. There's also a link here if you're interested in working for the federal government And then, as promised, the article Holly referenced entitled The Ineffectiveness of Custodial Sanctions and Reoffending, a Meta-Analysis. Again, this was the article by Petrich, Pratt, Johnson, and Cullen. I will squeeze all of those into the description of this show. Back next week with a fresh episode 100. Can you believe it, friends? Our centennial episode. And I could not be more pleased to bring you my scheduled guest, James Leonard and Timmy Long from the Two Norries podcast. If you've not had a chance to check out the Two Norries podcast, you're going to want to give them a listen and find out all about their podcast. The Two Norries podcast from the Irish city of Cork is themed around crime, mental health, addiction, and social and health issues. I'm super excited to have James and Timmy on the show next week to again celebrate our centennial episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices, implementation, program design, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You can go back and check out my recent trip to the beautiful nation of Scotland. We are also on Twitter, the Criminologist Media Group, at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this program. Hey, merchandise is available. Reach out if interested. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to thank you, Joe, for having me join you today. I'm a fan of your podcast, and I'm really pleased with the attention that you're bringing and all of the topics and things like that. So it's a real honor for me to be here today with you.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.